Thank you for joining us and for Agency Folk and Michael for putting this on. Agency Folk is putting on a calendar of ops focused events this year, which I'm super excited about. And great that everyone's sharing resources about where you learn about ops. Years ago, when I was starting off in that space, I felt very lonely and isolated. And I think that's changed so much over the past couple of years. So super exciting. But anyway, I am, like Michael said, a former in house agency operations director. I host the Handbook, the Agency Operations podcast, which hopefully some of you have heard about and subscribe to, and head of brand comms at Scoro. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but the true story is that I had brought in this platform at my agency years ago and really genuinely loved it and saw the impact on my team. So I decided to join them. But that's enough about me. So let's go to the next slide. My computer's working. Here we go. So what are we going to do today? For about the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk about how to stop winging it. Okay. So this is obviously an important part of your journey on business maturity. We're going to talk about launching or rebooting your knowledge hub, tools you can use to define and document your best practice, and streamlining onboarding, training, and support for your team. After that, like Michael said, we're going to go into breakout rooms and share some of our own kind of things that have worked well or not so well for us, and come back together and share some of that as a group. And finally, I think Michael's going to wrap up and tell us more about some of the ops stuff that is lined up with agency folk in the coming months as well, which is quite exciting. All right. But before we get started into some of those main topics, I just wanted to start with a reminder that business maturity is a scale. On one end, we've got chaos and making stuff up as we go, and there being no such thing as best practice. And on the other end, you're data driven, you're innovating to meet customer needs and staying ahead of the competition. The biggest milestone, though, in my point of view, is right in the middle, level 3 of 5. So you might think, like, why level 3 and not level 5? But I think there's some special stuff that happens at level 3, which coincides really nicely with today's topic. So here we go. So what is that level 3 magic? You're no longer making things up on the fly, but you end up having a carefully considered way of doing things consistently at this stage. That's achieved by you doing some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today, creating that central knowledge base and having a really clear idea of how things are done to your standards in your agency. Of course, this allows for better training and leads to consistent ways of working. And you also just at this stage get better tools in place to run your business. As a result of all of that, at this stage, you start moving away from being reactive to proactive in the way you're working and the way you make decisions and all that kind of stuff. In a nutshell, I think you start acting like a grown up business at level 3 on that maturity journey. So let's talk about that handbook. But as we're diving into it, I'd like you to think about, where does your agency knowledge live? Is it in people's heads? Is it rumors being passed around? Is it scattered across your communications tools and file storage solutions and stuff like that? I worked at an agency at one point where, new starter onboarding was completely organic. It was a bit like winning the lottery or not so much based on who you sat next to, and that's who you would learn from. And you'd pick up all their bad practice or good practice, again, depending on who you sat on. But the problem was, we were early in that maturity journey. It meant that everyone had their own point of view on how things are done. And obviously, that's not conducive to maturity. And that's not what we want to do. And it's something we need to start moving away from towards, of course, a single source of truth. The slides are being a bit funny, but there we go. So a place where everyone in your agency can go to find the answer, a place where you can point to people when they come to you for questions, so you don't have to repeat yourself dozens of times a day. Those of you that are on this call, you may already have a resource like that, or you may be looking to refresh it. But I wanted to talk about a few tools that you can use to create a resource like that. I'm not going to go into the pros and cons of each, but maybe a select few opinions. You could start in Google Docs. I don't love that personally because I think that can get a bit tangled and messy. And I like having a space for a knowledge base or a handbook that's like quite different from where your working documents are going to be. So it's just like separate and clean, distinctive place. Confluence is a documentation tool. I think it's absolutely hideous. Developers seem to love it, so I'm very happy for them to be in that space, but I don't like it. I think it looks a bit clunky and ugly, so I don't touch it. On the bottom row, we've got a number of platforms out there that are specifically for documentation and creating a knowledge base. And they've got some interesting functionality that is unique to those tools. Some of them have AI features built in. So instead of looking up an article, you can just ask it a question and it'll pull up your policy or something like that, which is quite cool. So some of you that use that might be familiar with that. But on the top row, there was a couple of others there, additional documentation tools. So Notion, we're all familiar with and probably have an account, not a bad choice. And then there's Coda. And if you're looking for something really simple and straightforward, I think actually Coda is a great place to start. They've got some AI features and stuff like that. I'll tell you more about that in a few moments, but I just wanted to start with showing some of the tools that are out there that you could be using to create that resource. But first, like, how do you start? So I'd say don't get stressed. It's unlikely that you're ever starting from zero. You'll have policies and contracts and stuff like that where information will be floating around. So what I tend to suggest is that you start with a table of contents of what you think should be included under various headings. I'll share some of those with you in a moment. But as you start building out that table of contents, more and more ideas will come to you and you'll just start fleshing it out. And like I said, a lot of this content will already exist. It'll be floating around on Slack and contracts in your Dropbox and all that kind of stuff. So it's really about starting to bring it together in a central place and removing the old resources so that people start referring to this and knowing that this is the place to go find the most up to date information. So what can you include? This is an example of the structure that I've used in the past. So I had the employee handbook that had stuff like everything about the company, mission, vision, values, working practices, hiring, the onboarding schedule. Again, something we're going to talk about in a few moments, career development, performance reviews, all that kind of stuff that people need to know. Then I had a tools and tech handbook, which was super critical. How to set up your new laptop or a new phone. I had a page per platform, literally every platform we used in the agency with just a blurb of what it's for, which teams use it, and any interesting gotchas or use cases and stuff like that. So not a long document at all, but just really useful reference for new starters to know, okay, this is when they use Zoom versus Microsoft Teams, which might be certain random stuff like that. But also starting to add FAQs there. Things like you don't want to be repeating regularly. How do you update your email signature? Or for people that can't figure it out, how do you set your out of office? So that was all stuff that I added there. So it was like, I'm not going to answer that question. It's all over there. And then the delivery handbook, everything related to methodology and your project lifecycle. So people know how projects run in your organization. Things like intellectual property policies, like what happens when clients want your design files? What are you going to say? So instead of handling that on the fly, having a resource that people can go look to, how do you start creating an NDA and stuff like that? And then sales and marketing resources so that your account managers and so on, the rest of your team knows what your social channels are and how you can support the company in those efforts. A reminder, of course, that this is an ever evolving resource, right? It's never going to stand still. So on a weekly basis, probably you're going to be tweaking and nudging or adding content to it. So it's just, I think it's fantastic that it becomes that kind of living, breathing, evolving resource. Which documentation tools do I love? I'm going to share my top three. Okay. The first is Coda. And I mentioned this a few moments ago. What I really love about Coda is that it is very familiar and very straightforward and an easy way to start. It looks and feels very much like Notion, which a lot of us have used. And it's also quite expandable in its functionality. And from what I've read with the integrations you can add and stuff like that, and the features where you can connect documents and create quite advanced things, it's apparently more capable than Notion. But I used it just for documentation. What I really loved about it was the price. You only have to pay for document creators. So those are people that create new pages. All the editors are free. All the viewers are free. That's quite different from Notion, which can add up really quickly because you're paying per user. And it's $10 per month on an annual plan. So $10 per doc maker. So if you imagine that's just you or somebody in your team that's responsible for maintaining this resource, that's $120 a year. It just doesn't get cheaper than that. So I love that and didn't want to spend a huge amount of money on a subscription for the knowledge base. So if you want to have a quick peek, you're welcome to scan that QR code or do that when you get the slides as well. But let's move on from Coda. Next, we have Scribe. This is such a great tool. So it lets you create step-by-step instructions with text and screenshots rather than you having to write all of that stuff out. It adds a little plugin to your browser, and then you just go do that thing and it handles everything else for you. And then you can just embed that document you've created in your handbook. So, in my view, this is really good for things that need a handful of steps and probably not a lot of context, like updating your email signature or things like that, things that are relatively easy. Why I think it's better for that stuff than the complex things that need loads of instruction and context, which can get quite overwhelming if you've got it ends up being like a 50-step document or something like that. But we'll talk about those more complex things in a moment. How does this work? Like I said, you click the little plugin in your browser and then you click the start capture button and then you go do that thing, whatever it is. And as you go, it automatically adds these really beautiful zoomed in screenshots and it captions each of them as well. And afterwards, if they're not quite right, you can go edit the text and improve that. So just such an easy way to create some instructions for your team. And then my absolute favorite tool is Loom. Video is just absolutely one of my favorite ways of sharing how-tos with my team. And I always got really positive feedback from it as well. I'm going to show you how it works if you're not aware and how I used it in a few moments in more detail. But it lets you really easily create screen recordings with voiceover and video. And it's so easy to edit out bits or merge multiple videos together on their website. It uploads it instantly and it's ready to edit and all that kind of stuff. So it's just super, super seamless. And of course, you can embed the videos in your handbook and sorry, I was going to say my favorite reason for using Loom over Scribe is as an operations director or an agency leader or a finance director or whatever, you probably have a lot of context or things you want to say to just to contextualize whatever that topic is. And if you're trying to do that in writing, that ends up turning into paragraphs. And I don't know about yourselves or your teams, I think, and then people can follow along. So let's see how that works. You click the little button in your browser and immediately a video pops up of you in the bottom right corner and you hit record. And like I said, as soon as you click stop, it's been uploaded and ready for you to embed or edit or whatever you want to do. The other thing I forgot to mention actually is it also produces a transcript of your video. So then you can dump that in ChatGPT and say, turn this into step-by-step instructions. So if you want to complement your video with instructions for somebody that would prefer written stuff, you can produce that really easily and do best of both worlds. A really quick example of what the finished product can look like. So as I had mentioned, I'd brought in Scoro at my past agency. So I used Loom to create all of the resources on how we wanted to use the platform internally. No matter what platform it is, they always have their own knowledge base and resources and instructions on how to do those things. But when it comes to training your team on how to do something, you probably have a point of view about, first of all, how projects flow through your company and any kind of nuances and instructions on how you think things should work. So this is an opportunity for you to take control of that and create that narrative. So a 10-second example of a video I've created.
Go into your quote, and then you can scroll to the bottom and say, use data on quote to create a project. So here we're starting to see the benefits of that.
Okay, so really like easy to use videos that you can embed and use wherever you like. Those were my absolute favorite tools. Coda, Scribe, and Loom all kind of come together to support one another and become really useful tools for your colleagues. 5 easy ways to embed best practice, or in other words, get on the maturity journey and stop winging it. Okay. So I'm absolutely certain what I said, that example I gave earlier in when I started presenting about those terrible onboardings, I'm certain all of us have experienced that at businesses or agencies we've joined in the past. You show up, you're lucky if you have a laptop and if anyone pays you any attention to give you and tell you what you need to do. And to be honest, I think it was the trauma from experiencing that and seeing other people having to go through that started the initial sparks of me getting on the operations journey and being like, okay, this is not right. We need to sort this out. But the point here is to create a robust onboarding template is my first point, sorry, and giving people the time to do it right. You're hiring people because your team needs the additional support. So if you're leaving the learning process to be organic or letting that drag out into 6 months, you're not going to get the best out of that person. So by creating this time block where they don't have to worry about projects and they can just focus on learning, just gets them up to speed so much more quickly. So for my new starters, what I would do is create a 1 week onboarding schedule that laid out exactly what they were meant to be doing each day, literally hour by hour, and then they could check off as they went through it. And that would give me the confidence that, yeah, they've done that thing and learned that. So that would be things they needed to read, training materials they needed to watch, people they needed to meet, and tools they needed to understand. This takes away that person's anxiety of being the new starter and not knowing what they're supposed to be doing. It creates such a great first impression. And it takes away the pressure from your other team members to be on standby, to be constantly asking questions or giving away all of their time when they're working on projects and all that kind of stuff, to be explaining things. And it just takes all that pressure off of the line manager if you get that. The second point for your mission critical systems or methodologies, I think is to take the time to create those resources to support your team. So this is super important when you're moving to a major new platform. Of course, people don't like change. And understandably, there's a lot of anxiety and questions that come up when you're moving to a new system or platform that changes the way people are used to working. So preparing these resources ahead of time means that people feel super secure and supported. And you can say, hey, look, we're going to do this 2 hour training session, but you don't need to remember anything. We've got it all covered. We've got loads of FAQs already ready for you. And you're going to be supported along the way. And it just makes your life so much easier when you're rolling out a new platform. And again, instead of answering questions and people having meltdowns, they know where to go look, right? So a couple of examples, I've asked my past agency if I can add some screenshots, but this is an example of one of those pages in the software and tech handbook that I had created for Scoro. First, the FYI page about what this platform is and what it's used for. And you can see a couple of subpages that I'm going to go into in a few moments, the learn by watching page and the practice cases I'd created. So let's go into the learn by watching page. So here's where I was saying the product, no matter what it is, will always have a help center and their own videos and stuff like that. But this is your point of view. So before I launched Scoro to my team, I had done this beforehand. So people knew that when they needed to create a quote, they knew where to go look for that instruction. How do you raise an invoice? How do you do a purchase order? My quote's been signed off. How do I turn it into a project? And I used Loom to create all of the resources so people would watch. And what I would say to people is also that I don't want you to watch this 2 hour training session or whatever it was and try to memorize it or go back and try to watch that, or then just go off memory and try to remember what we said. These are bite-sized things that are going to take you 2 minutes to watch, and it shows you exactly what you need to do. So please go and follow those for the first few weeks as you go through the motions until this becomes second nature, and then continuing to evolve that. Okay. You can take that further as well for your most important platforms. And that is by creating practice scenarios. And the idea for this actually came from feedback from new starters saying, your handbook is amazing. This is like the best onboarding I've ever had. But what would be even more useful is that you created an opportunity for us to do some of this stuff before I had to go and do it on a live project. You have this fear of messing something up, and that is a real fear on a live project. And also it's troublesome for everybody else if somebody screws that up, because then you have to fix a real project, right? So what I ended up doing is writing practice cases for the key platforms that I really cared about. And it was really only two that I did this for in my agency. One was Scoro and one was Dropbox. So that would, I'm going to show an example of this briefly in a moment as well, but really starting from how do you look up if you already have a client or a supplier in the system? Okay, you've looked that up. Here, you go and create a quote with this scope and submit it for sign off, and then go create an invoice. And again, it walks them through the methodology of your company of how a project flows and gives them the opportunity to test all this stuff. You might wonder, like, did you really need to do this for Dropbox? But there was different ways we shared files internally versus with clients. And the way heavy Adobe design files worked on Dropbox, there were nuances to that. So instead of just like blaming the person the following week and saying, oh, you screwed that up, you're not supposed to do that, an opportunity for them to test that and learn that in their first weeks so that they get it right and they understand. All right. So an example of that practice case. So this was the page where I had that script written out of saying these are the things. First of all, let's get orientated. And now let's go through these motions of all the key stages of your project. And that might be different for a designer or a developer, probably doesn't have to do all of that stuff. But someone who's an account manager or project manager probably does. They do need to know how to invoice and close a project and raise a purchase order and track their budgets and stuff like that, right? An example of that test scenario. There's a client working at this company. Do they exist? Go check. And if not, go create them. Step two, they've requested the following scope. Use the quote templates in the system and the learn by watching page to go build out that quote. Super useful and really empowering, I think, for people to feel confident. Next is all about signposting. I should have got a tattoo of this on my forehead. And in fact, this is why I called the podcast the Handbook, the Agency Operations Podcast, because it just became my kind of strap line. It's in the handbook, right? Any questions that came up, instead of having to repeat yourself over and over for yourself, for the finance director or whoever, it just also reinforces that this is an indispensable resource for your company and where people should be going to check first. And when people did ask a question, I would always say, go check the handbook first. And if you still have questions or there's a special nuance to your problem, I'd be very happy to help you if you go look and check that doesn't answer your question first. And the point about actually, when I was saying creating this learn by watching page for your most important tools, is that when enough people asked a question, or even sometimes one, but it's, yeah, that somebody else is going to bound to ask that again, I would go create another Loom video and add it to that table of contents. And the next time you can just go say it's video number 25, and that will help you, right? Last one is reinforcing the skills. So in my monthly internal newsletter, in the monthly all hands, I have a section on this about reinforcing skills about whatever it is, any new tool or existing tool, whether it's something everyone seems to be having trouble with or things that need a reminder or new features or changes to the best practice. It's a really great way of ensuring that everyone is aware and has seen that, especially in the all hands. So there's no excuses for anyone to say, "Oh, I didn't know that." It's, you were in that, you were there, and we shared this with everyone. And then they know that you've also updated your handbook with that resource so that it's available for them. Okay. Last note is just a reminder to us that best practice evolves and needs to evolve. So you're going to learn something every week, every month that's going to require tweaks. And that's an important thing to do. And that I think we're all aware of this, but real life is messy and complicated. There does need to be flexibility. But what we're doing with all of the above and creating these resources is creating the official point of view from your agency, from our agencies, that is the starting point about how things are done. So people aren't guessing, they're not making it up, and they're not going rogue, which I think as a ops person, a finance person, I used to work hand in hand with the operations director. And it was even worse for her when people messed up the invoicing or whatever, because then you just have loads of stuff to go backtrack and fix, right? So it prevents going rogue. So for this part of the webinar, that's it. But before we get into breakout rooms, I just wanted to remind you that I host the podcast, The Handbook. So if you haven't subscribed to that, please do. So that's basically it. We're going to go into breakout rooms, a couple people each, and we're going to discuss the key things are what has worked well in your agency or companies you've worked with regards to best practice documentation and training. You know, things that you might be doing that I haven't mentioned here, or tools that you love that I haven't mentioned here. So please do share those with your group. What does your agency struggle with regards to best practice? You know, are there people that simply don't get it or refuse and stuff like that? Who knows? So share some of that stuff, and then we'll come back together and share some notes about.
We're going to have a group discussion. So I'll hand back over to Harv, who will
Thanks.
lead and ask some questions of you all. So hopefully you've got something to share.
Thanks very much, Michael. So just throwing the question back to you guys. Hopefully there were some interesting chats there. My first question is just where we started. What works well, or what have you seen work well, whether it's your current agency or past places that you've worked? Does anybody want to start and share anything that you guys discussed? Don't be shy.
I'll start. I've just talked the hind legs off the two people that I was with, Adrian and Marion. They're very patient in this. Yeah, no, I was just echoing everything that you said, to be honest, Harv, and the templatizing everything as much as possible. I'm not in an agency at the moment. I work as a consultant in operations, but I'm still learning every single day. But yeah, I think there is no 100% when it comes to having everything in one place and everything as tip top, like you said. But it's just iterate, reiterate, and tweak along the way, and just find out what your kind of best in class is of everything that you've done. So the best estimate you've ever put out, the best pitch, the best brief, everything, and go, okay, we'll make that our template, put it in your SOPs, make a link for it, and then just tweak as you go.
Absolutely. Yeah, I that example of your best pitch or whatever as well. I had a kind of a section in my handbook also for news. It just reminded me that. So anything new coming up, just documenting that there so people know. And that included like big pitch wins or something like that. And in fact, I had created a table in Coda as well of every pitch that was delivered and all the kind of industry and all those kind of tags so that when people wanted a reference, it's not just like sharing a Slack message saying, guys, I need a pitch example. They could go find a pitch that matched that. So that's a really great example. Anybody else? Things that have worked really well for you?
Yeah, I had one. Uh, I work for a sustainability consultancy in operations, and there's not many of us in the kind of behind the scenes core services side of things. So it's really been a case of trying to figure out what works best for engagement. And we found, not sure what you think of this, Harv, but the video kind of side of things, like making those short clips and stuff, people weren't engaging with them very
Oh,
much.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And they said that when they just have a quick question, they don't want to sit down and watch a video. They just want to search it up in some kind of document or on a port and just find out, okay, how do I do an invoice? And then it's just there. So what we've done is basically handbook everything. So we've got a Scoro handbook, and we've just redone like a staff handbook, and making sure that we've got those, essentially everything is just word vomited into a massive document and everything's there. But yeah, we're saying that it'd be great to have everything in one place on perhaps one of those systems that you suggested, because that's the downside for ours. We've got everything, but it's all over the place at the moment.
Yeah.
But for kind of engagement, it's been really great for us because everyone knows that it's going to be in this document. So yeah, that's been good.
That's really good feedback. And yeah, to your point, like everybody likes learning in different ways, right? So I find those contextual videos super useful and got great feedback. But using those transcripts is one way to give people both options. So there might be some people that prefer one or the other. So you can do best of both worlds by using a bit of a remix. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Things that work well?
Yeah, we're a brand consultancy, so we've invested quite a lot of time over the last 18 months, 2 years, building out our handbook. Probably about 2/3 of the way through that list of yours, Harv.
Okay.
So that invested quite a bit of time in content, so that seems to have worked okay. I think where our challenges are just in the kind of ongoing engagement, and once you've created a guideline on something, one of the most recent ones we've done is we've just done a big Dropbox migration, issuing new guidelines on file naming and all that exciting stuff. That's where the sort of challenge is, communicating that and then getting people to follow it. And you need those reminders and stuff like that, refreshing people's memories on what they should be doing type thing. Otherwise, they just will type.
Yeah, you're totally right. The reinforcement element is so important, especially in the early days. But I think continuing to signpost towards that stuff when you see something that's not quite right, or getting the team leads to say, the creative director, when they might be looking at like file names and stuff. If you see something really screwed up, at least just nudge the person. So it's not just yourself that's having to do all of that, but it becomes the standard that people start trying to aspire towards. Anybody else? Things work well? Otherwise, the next question was going to be, I mentioned Loom, Coda, and Scribe. Does anybody use anything else that's worked really well for yourselves? Wayne?
Sorry, me again. Yeah, we're primarily Microsoft 365 based, so we've actually built ours in SharePoint.
Oh, cool.
Which is free as well. Obviously, if you've got Microsoft 365 subscription, it takes a little bit more management, I think, but we've got like a core team of about 4 people that are responsible for all the content, and seems to work.
Nice. Excellent. Anybody else seen anything interesting out there in terms of tools or platforms that you use either as the documents or the kind of documentation tools?
I really like Scribe. I think it's great.
Yeah, it is super cool, isn't it?
It's really helpful. You can do those kind of guides, and it's a nice kind of midpoint between videos and transcripts. And yeah, it's been great when we've been using it internally.
Excellent. Cool. And then I guess question is about challenges. Is there, Wayne brought up one, which is reinforcement of something, especially when you're moving to a new system. But anybody else want to share any challenges or anything like that? I always used to have one, sorry, just I was going to share one quick example. There was always like, I feel like there's always at least one person in the organization that thinks their projects or their clients are very special and it's everything needs to be done in a special way. And it always made me roll my eyes a little bit, being like, "Oh, yeah, okay." But anyway, Justina, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, that's very recognizable. I also have the it's a special treatment, but I usually explain that the rules are the rules, and we have a rules for the reason. We still are one agency, even though that department wants to act as a separate agency. We still need to connect. My challenge is actually when doing charts and workflows in general, because I look after a lot of cross-departmental communication and processes. So let's say one department goes brief as something to another, and I'm trying to maximize an efficiency there. And those Word documents and so on, yes, they are harder to read. People don't really keen to watch the videos, but the charts work really well. But I spend a lot of time developing them. And I don't think I have the best tool where I could just quickly, drop in what I need to be done as a chart and just get the tool to do it for me. If I spend way too much time drawing them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've seen that question and I wondered and hoped for that question as well, where you can just say, these are my instructions, create a flowchart for me. So if anybody has found that or you do find that, please let me know. And right now it is a manual process. You end up you could do something like Keynote and just manually create something or using something like Miro or Mural to lay out your flowcharts and all that kind of stuff. So unfortunately, no magic solutions that I know of for that.
Holly had a very good idea, actually. Sorry, I interrupted someone. Just gonna finish. Holly had a very good idea about your Microsoft, and there is like an AI functionality there which tidies things up. So I think that's really good. But we are Google first agency, so for us it's a bit difficult because we don't really have that advanced Microsoft because we're led by Google. Whoever wanted to say something, please go.
Yeah, sorry, it's just a quick idea. I don't have as much documentation handbook situation as many others in the room, which is something why I joined the call to establish that. But from a project management perspective, from an AI perspective, I was using Claude.ai to help me map out a flow chart of how to organize like Monday.com in the most effective way. So I just prompted it with what I needed it to achieve. And I said, now draw me a flow chart to do that. And it created the entire map for me. And then I said, okay, great. Now give me the exact automation prompt that I need to put into Monday to make this happen. And it writes me the whole automation prompt. So I can just literally step by step follow that. And although it's not, you can export these flow charts in different formats, which I wasn't really familiar with, but the essence is there. You can pass it to quite a bit of stuff.
Okay.
Which helped us to run our website project and things like that.
Super cool. Maybe that's one for us to check out, Justina. Anybody else? Any challenges or anything else before we wrap up? Please don't be shy to share.
I can jump back in.
Yeah,
Sorry.
please do.
One challenge, and I think we sometimes use freelancers to deliver some of our work. And we have, although it's not formally written down, we have some ways of working through Asana, through Monday.com and so on, Figma and all these. And it's just trying to get a freelancer to follow the rules often isn't that easy. It's, hey, we do it this way. If I tag you in this, I need you to then do it versus me then chasing you separately on Slack to do the thing I've already tagged you in.
Yeah.
That's a problem that anyone else has had.
Totally good point. And the way, I don't know if this is the best answer, the way I would handle that, and it was a bit of a pain, but it was like, handle it two ways. If the freelancer was going to be there for a couple of days or like a week, they were treated slightly different from somebody that was going to be there for weeks. And so somebody that was there going to be for weeks or longer term, we took the effort to give them the Dropbox training and the proper timesheet training in Scoro and stuff like that and create an account. and said, okay, you're going to need to be working this way. Whereas if somebody was only going to be there for a handful of days, it was like, we're just going to raise a purchase order for your time on the project rather than letting you timesheet because it's just not worth it. And maybe even just package the files that you need and send them to you rather than giving you access to our file system and stuff like that. But you're right. So that might be one thing to think of, is just depending on the length of the agreement with them, treating them slightly differently. But it is a difficult one because once you get into this way of working that you want things to be like in a certain way, or your company works a certain way, it is tricky when you have people coming in and out, just to not make that become really heavy for yourself and perhaps really heavy for them. But to be honest, for those freelancers that were going to be sticking around for a couple of weeks, we did at least save a couple of hours on their first morning for the training or onboarding time with them. And it was hopefully mostly self-directed as well. But just saying, you need to be watching this and setting up such and such for the next little while so you understand. Cool. I think we're running out of time, so might leave it there. But again, please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't. Oh, another good one that's related to our topic today was my interview with Sarah Broom, who talks about onboarding and training new starters. So hiring and onboarding. So episode with Sarah Broom is definitely one you should all listen to if you haven't already. She had some really good advice. But Michael, I think I'm going to hand it over to yourself. Again, super excited about all the ops stuff you have going on because it's my favorite topic. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about that.
Cool. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to cut this short, but I'm sure you've all got very busy days and things to get on with. So we'll aim to finish at 3. A big thank you again to Harv Nagra. I think you all agree that was a wonderful session. Hopefully you got a lot out of it as well. And thank you to all of you for attending. It's wonderful to see you. And thank you for sticking around to the end. The slides, the recording and the guest list will be shared tomorrow via Eventbrite. But for now, in the chat, I have put the slides, the link to it. So if you want to have a look at those, feel free to do. Also, as Harv mentioned, we have a whole series of events, at least 2 or 3 a month, online and in person for agency folk. And over the next few weeks and months, we have a bit of an operations focus as well. So there's a link in there for future events. Do have a look at that. You'll get the link again through Eventbrite, but feel free to join anything else online or in person. And I've also added Harv's LinkedIn account profile again and his podcast link again. So I do urge you to have a listen to that. There's loads of fantastic guests on there. How long's it been going, Harv?
7 months now, I think.
7 months. Oh, wow. You've got a lot of content in there. I thought you'd been going longer than that, looking at all the content. Yeah, do have a listen. There's loads of great experts in there sharing their insights on a whole range of subjects, operations and more. So the last thing to say is thank you very much for attending and enjoy the rest of your day.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for joining.